At breakfast, Mom said, "Your sister's twins will take your room. They need space to grow." I looked up, half a breath from speaking. Dad slammed his glass down. "Agree or get out of this house." The milk jumped. The twins cried. Sabrina didn't look up from her phone. I nodded, just nodded. Because arguing in this family never changed the script. My tongue tasted like chalk. The cinnamon roll I baked that morning turned to cardboard in my mouth. I kept smiling. That's my job. I bake peace offerings for people who confuse silence with agreement. My name is Christine, 31, quiet daughter, owner of a small pastry shop on Linen and 3rd. People say I'm calm. They mistake endurance for peace. I remember everyone's coffee order, but can't remember the last time anyone remembered mine. They call Sabrina the miracle. They call me the stable one. Stable means useful. Useful means available. Available means empty. That morning, I learned something important. Even glue breaks when the weight keeps changing. Before the eviction, there was a tab. It started small. Textbooks for Sabrina, a traffic ticket, a career emergency blazer from Nordstrom. She said, "You're better with money." I said, "I'll cover it this time." There was always a this time. My parents called it helping. I called it math with no ending. When Sabrina married, I made the 5-tier cake. When she had twins, I bought both cribs. She said, "You're good at providing." Mom said, "You're independent. You don't need as much help as your sister." Dad said nothing, just handed me receipts I didn't remember signing. Every favor became a ledger entry. Every smile cost a little more. I kept a small notebook behind the register. Lines, numbers, dates. $18,542.19. I wasn't rich. I was consistent. And consistency looks like wealth to people who never pay you back. Then came the boxes. First a stroller, then 2, then the changing table. "Just for now," she said. My room turned into storage, a museum of my own childhood. Posters curled at the corners. Trophies stood beside baby bottles. Some nights after closing the bakery, I'd crash on that bed half covered by diapers I'd bought myself. Mom called it family adjustment. I called it eviction in progress. That morning's breakfast wasn't sudden. It was just the last straw finding its stack. I heard the glass slam again in my head. Sharp, final like a gavel. Then the sentence landed. And something in me started to count backward, not forgive. The breaking point wasn't loud. It came over Sunday lunch, quiet as steam. Roast chicken, rosemary, baby shampoo. I brought a tart because I didn't know what else to bring. Dad started without hello. "We found a contractor. You'll write the check. We'll pay you back." "How much?" I asked. Even though I already knew. 42 with permits, he said. Mom nodded like that number meant kindness. "And Sabrina and the babies will move into your room this week," she added. "Take your things tonight. What's left can be tossed." "Tossed?" I repeated. "My stuff is clutter?" Sabrina didn't look up. "Chris, don't make this dramatic. You don't even use the room." She took a sip of water. "Also, daycare waitlist fees came through. Can you spot me 600? I looked around the table. The twins slept. The chicken cooled. The silence asked me to obey. "I can't," I said. 3 heads lifted, shocked. Dad frowned. "Can't what?" "I can't write a check for 42,000. I can't pay daycare. I can't move my things out tonight so you can throw them away." Mom stiffened. "Don't be childish. We all sacrifice for family." "I've sacrificed," I said, steady now. 18,542 since last May. 212 hours on your renovations. Free cakes, free deliveries, midnight calls, early drop-offs. I've given and given. And when I asked for one thing, keep my room, you told me to agree or get out. Dad leaned back. "You keeping score?" "You kept it first," I said. Every favor became proof I owed more. Sabrina laughed. "This is about the room? Seriously?" "This isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about closure, about boundaries." Dad's jaw tightened. "Then get out." "Okay," I said, pushing my chair back. "I will." Mom's voice cracked. "Christine, sit down." "I'll be back tonight for my things," I said. "The rest is yours." Sabrina's laugh thinned. "You've changed." "I noticed," I said, walking out. Dad shouted, "If you leave like this, don't come back." I paused at the door. I'm tired of nodding. I met Mom's eyes. Good luck with the space. I left the tart on the counter. I didn't slam the door. Outside, the air felt sharper. Not free, just different. Like silence after a storm, still deciding if it's over. I sat in my car until my heartbeat slowed. Hands shaking, but steady enough to hold the wheel. Somewhere between that driveway and the stoplight, something in me unclenched for the first time in years. Driving back to the bakery. The silence hummed louder than the radio. I cleaned the espresso machine. I opened my laptop. I needed to look at something that wasn't family. Zillow. A new listing, 3 bedrooms, quiet cul-de-sac. Next door. High price. But not impossible. I called the agent. I'd like to make an offer, I said. You move fast, he replied. Not really, I said. Just tired. Next door. High price. But not impossible. I called the agent. I'd like to make an offer, I said. You move fast, he replied. Not really, I said. Just tired. The next 48 hours blurred like a fever dream. Papers signed. Emails. Wiring funds. I barely slept. Just caffeine, flour, and adrenaline. By Wednesday afternoon, the deed had my name on it. A 3-bedroom house. Same street, next door. The irony didn't hurt. It healed. That night I drove there. With a folding chair, a pillow, and a grocery bag. The air smelled like pine cleaner and old dust. I opened every window. The quiet felt earned. For dinner, I ate a cold sandwich on the floor. It tasted like freedom disguised as cheap bread. I walked through the rooms slowly, palms tracing the walls like they were breathing again. The light bulbs hummed softly, and the fridge made a sound like a sigh. I unrolled a blanket in the middle of the empty living room, set my phone face down, and let silence fill the corners that used to hold other people's opinions. For the first time in years, I didn't owe anyone a response. At 7:02 a.m. Thursday, I stood on my new porch with coffee in hand. Across the lawn, the blinds twitched. Then the front door opened. Mom stepped out in her robe. Christine, she said, stunned. I smiled. Morning. Dad appeared behind her, jaw tight, voice low. What are you doing? Living, I said. You think this is funny? No, I said, I think it's close. Close to what? Closure. He scoffed. You bought a house to spite us. I bought it because you told me to get out. And because I can afford to live without proving my worth every time you need a check. He looked past me into the empty living room. So what now? You'll just sit there and watch us? No, I said, smiling. I'll say good morning, like neighbors do. His stare lingered, caught between pride and disbelief. We raised you, he said. I know, I replied softly. And I learned how to stand. He blinked, like hearing his daughter's voice for the first time. Then he left, shaking his head. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Mom's text, you've humiliated this family. Then another. Can you at least bring cinnamon rolls on Sunday? The twins love them. I didn't reply. Back at the bakery, the ovens glowed gold against the dawn. The smell of butter filled the air. Sweet, warm, unbothered. I leaned on the counter, watching the dough rise. Slow and steady. Proof that even something soft can hold its shape if the heat is right. Each tray came out even, golden. And for once, so did I. By noon, the rumor machine started humming. Aunt Nora called. Your mother is hysterical. Uncle Ted texted a thumbs-up emoji. Bold move, kid. I laughed, then turned my phone off. The world could wait. Inside my new house, the light kept moving across the floor, like forgiveness learning to walk. By evening, Dad came over. No hello. You think this is maturity? He asked. No, I said, it's maintenance. Maintenance? Of peace. Of sanity. Of boundaries you never believed in. He didn't like that word. Boundaries sounded like rebellion in his language. You bought this house out of spite, he said again. I bought it out of exhaustion. He looked away first. That felt new. The next morning, messages piled up. Mom, you've broken this family. Sabrina, we need money for daycare. Just help this once. I typed slowly. I'm paying what I owe. Mortgage, groceries, payroll. That's the list. Sabrina sent a string of question marks. Are you serious? Yes. You've changed. I noticed. She sent a photo of the twins, their small faces framed in sunlight. Don't punish them. I'm not, I said. I'm protecting me. Her reply came fast. Dad says you're selfish. Then he finally noticed I exist, I said. Hours passed. The house stayed quiet. For years, quiet meant isolation. Now it sounded like control. At dusk, I stepped outside with coffee. The blinds across the lawn moved again. The door opened. Mom stood there, hesitated, then waved, small, unsure. I raised my mug. Good morning, I said, though it was nearly night. She didn't answer. But she didn't go back inside either. The next day, Sabrina showed up with the stroller. You embarrassed Mom, she said. People are talking. People always talk, I said. Half the time they're wrong. You could have helped like you always do. I did, for years. Dad says you're cutting us off. I'm paying my bills, I said. That's all. That's enough. She crossed her arms. So you won't help with daycare? No. The contractor? No. She laughed, brittle. Then enjoy your empty house. I will, I said. You're welcome to visit. With a text first and no invoices attached. Her mouth opened, then closed. You've really changed. Finally, I said. She turned the stroller around. The twins looked at me and smiled. I waved. Good morning, I said again, and meant it. When the street went quiet again, I stood on my porch, coffee cooling in my hands. No noise, no requests, just the wind and the sound of my own boundaries holding steady. For the first time in my life, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Weeks passed, and the quiet turned into rhythm. I woke early, preheated the oven, watched light pour across the bakery floor. The morning smelled like butter and second chances. Bills came. I paid them. The balance stayed real, mine. Some nights, I still checked my phone, expecting another request, another crisis. But there was nothing. Just space. Space to breathe. Space to think about something other than owing. Mom still sent photos of the twins. Sabrina sent recipes she wanted to try together sometime. I hearted them, no words attached. Boundaries don't always break relationships. Sometimes they teach people how to meet you. One morning, I saw Sabrina across the lawn loading her car. She looked up. Morning, she called. Morning, I said. She hesitated, then smiled. A small one but real. That's how healing starts. Not with apologies, but with eye contact and a softer tone. I'm not the villain they painted, or the savior I pretended to be. I'm just a woman learning. That peace doesn't mean silence. It means self-respect that doesn't shake when someone raises their voice. I don't want revenge. I don't even want them to understand. I just want to live without owing an explanation. For the boundaries that keep me whole. Some mornings, I still step outside with coffee in hand, look at their house, and whisper the same two words. Good morning. And this time, it's not politeness. It's freedom. If you've ever been told that saying no makes you selfish, remember this. It's not selfish to stop bleeding for people who never notice the wound. It's survival.
The message came at 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday. No greeting, no lead-in, just my father's voice measured and clipped like a business memo. Don't bother coming to the family reunion. We're cutting ties. That was it. 18 words. 18 syllables if you count the pause before he hung up. I replayed it once. Not because I didn't believe it, but because for some reason I expected to feel something bigger. A spike of rage, a punch in the chest, something. But all I felt was stillness. Like the part of me that had been quietly bracing for this had finally heard what it always knew. My name is Harper Lane. I'm the youngest of two. My father, Warren, built Lane Auto Care from the ground up first as a mechanic, then a franchise owner, then a regional chain operator. My older brother, Rhett, is the heir he always wanted, charismatic, reckless, untouchable. And me, I was the one who kept the lights on. Quietly, efficiently, invisibly. I didn't call back that night. I didn't ask why. I didn't even forward the voicemail to my mother, Lynette, who historically stayed out of business matters when they became inconvenient. I just texted him 2 words, understood. Then I opened my laptop signed into the loan portal I hadn't touched in months and did what I knew none of them expected me to do. I removed my name. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of clarity. 2 years earlier, when the family business needed to secure a $2.5 million expansion loan, the bank asked for a secondary applicant with impeccable credit. Rhett had debt. Warren had leverage. I had clean numbers and a Harvard MBA. They didn't beg me to sign. They simply handed me the papers assumed I would. And I did. Because back then, I still thought loyalty earned belonging. But now, sitting alone at my kitchen table, the voicemail playing faintly in the background, I realized something else entirely. They hadn't cut me off. They'd simply confirmed what they'd been quietly doing for years, and this time I was ready to finish the sentence for them. I used to think my father loved order more than anything, but over time I realized it wasn't order, it was control. Warren Lane built Lane Auto Care the same way he built our house, brick by brick, rule by rule, with no room for softness. The garage came first, the family came second, sometimes third. He had a saying, one he liked to repeat in front of employees and even more in front of us. We don't hire outsiders, we raise replacements, and that's what Rhett and I were potential successors, at least in theory. Rhett was 3 years older, louder, bolder, and always walking just slightly out of reach of responsibility, but he had the charm Warren respected, a swagger my father recognized in himself. So Rhett got the praise, the second chances, the leeway. I got the clipboard. By 12, I was logging tire shipments into QuickBooks. By 16, I was managing payroll at the third location during spring break. I didn't ask. I was told. No thank yous, no questions. Just the unspoken expectation that I'd be wherever the business needed me available, obedient, tireless. My mother, Lynette, wasn't cruel. She simply disappeared inside her role, hosting dinner, folding invoices into envelopes, smiling through meetings, then pulling me aside after to remind me your father's building something for us. Be grateful, sweetheart. So I was, or I tried to be. I studied hard, got my MBA, turned down a corporate logistics offer in Chicago because Warren said family before ambition. He needed someone to help with the regional expansion. Rhett apparently was focusing on vision. I focused on everything else. When the opportunity came to secure funding for a new headquarters, I negotiated the lease, compared rates across 6 banks, landed a deal with favorable terms and a 3-year interest lock. But the bank wanted a second signer. Rhett couldn't, his credit was trashed. Warren didn't want to jeopardize personal assets. So they turned to me. No big speech, no dinner, just the papers on the table and a pen already uncapped. I hesitated maybe for half a second, then I signed. Because somewhere inside, I still believed that if I showed I was loyal enough, indispensable enough, they'd finally see me not as the backup plan, but as part of the plan. Of course, they never said thank you. They just assumed it was my job. That was 2 years ago. I thought I was investing in a future we'd share. I didn't know then I was just making myself useful enough to be invisible. And if you're quiet long enough, you start to believe that invisibility is a kind of love. It's not. It's just silence mistaken for peace. The first crack didn't sound like breaking. It sounded like laughter. Rhett's laughter, to be exact. We were in a quarterly budget meeting, just the 3 of us, me, Rhett, and Warren. I had flagged a vendor invoice, $12,000 duplicated over 3 months. A clear error, or at least I thought so. That's from a friend of mine, Rhett said, waving it off like it was lint on his collar. Let it slide. He gives us good rates elsewhere. I looked to my father, expecting something. A raised brow, maybe. A single word of scrutiny. But Warren didn't flinch. He just reached for his coffee and said, "Focus on bigger things, Harper. Stop acting like an outsider. Outsider." That word didn't just sting. It settled somewhere under my skin. I wasn't some recent hire. I had overseen logistics for 4 site expansions, renegotiated our fleet lease at half the original cost, and kept payroll balanced through 2 supply chain disruptions. And yet, when I questioned anything that didn't involve spreadsheets or silent compliance, I became foreign. After that meeting, things changed, subtly at first. My access to our back-end systems began to narrow. I couldn't log into vendor platforms. Then, the financial dashboard redirected me to a read-only page. The company credit card tied to my name expired. It was never replaced. Every time I asked, I got the same answer: we're restructuring, or temporary system changes, or worse, don't worry about it. And yet I noticed Rhett had a new standing desk, a company-paid trip to Vegas labeled as Leadership Summit, and an office chair that cost more than my first used car. Something shifted inside me, not anger, not yet, but a quiet alertness, the kind that comes when your instincts whisper, "They're preparing a door for you, and it only opens one way." I started keeping copies of everything: internal spending reports, meeting notes, emails where Rhett copied clients but signed using my name. At night, I organized them into a private folder on my home computer, one I called Shadow Ledger. I wasn't sure yet what I was building, just that I needed to hold on to truth while it was still in my hands. One evening, I reached out to Danielle Keller, a former classmate from law school. We'd lost touch for years until she helped her sister escape a messy divorce from a real estate partnership. I didn't tell Danielle everything just enough to ask a simple question: if a co-signer withdraws from a business loan, what happens? Her pause was telling. Depends. If you're not a guarantor and you weren't involved in recent misuse, the loan can be re-evaluated without your name. Quietly, legally. I exhaled. At that moment, I didn't know whether I was planning an exit or building an alibi. What I did know finally was that the story I thought I was living the loyal daughter keeping the legacy afloat wasn't mine anymore. They weren't just pushing me out. They were doing it slowly enough to keep cashing in on my silence. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when the final piece clicked into place. The trees outside my office window were just starting to bud. I remember that detail clearly because something about new leaves made what I was about to find feel even more stale. I had just received my monthly credit summary, something I reviewed out of habit more than worry, but this time a line item stood out: Lane Holdings, Deferred Payment Review. I hadn't seen that name used in years. It was a shell corporation Warren once created for real estate holdings dormant, or so I thought. Curious, I dug deeper. What I found wasn't surprising. It was worse. The expansion loan I had co-signed 2 years ago, the one used to launch Lane Auto Care's new regional headquarters, was in arrears. 3 payments late. The business was behind, barely floating on grace periods and delayed vendor invoices. My name was still on the loan. And worse yet, it was being cited in communications with creditors as a reason to extend goodwill, because my credit was clean, because my finances were untouched, because I was, as always, the reliable one. But I hadn't seen a financial report in months. I hadn't been included in a board meeting since last fall, and the last time I asked Rhett for an update, he replied with a winking emoji and "no worries, sis." Big vision coming. Vision didn't pay the bills. I pulled up archived records, traced invoices back 6 quarters, compared spending against budget projections I had written myself. And then I saw it: over $40,000 in consulting fees, all funneled through a friend of Rhett's. Several entries labeled marketing testing had no campaigns tied to them. Fleet repairs triple billed, and vendor quotes signed with my initials, ones I never approved. It wasn't mismanagement, it was orchestration. That same day, I met with Danielle again, this time in person. We sat across from each other in a quiet booth at a coffee shop she liked near the courthouse. I showed her everything. She flipped through the document slowly, lips pressed, eyes steady. When she reached the co-signed loan agreement, she stopped. "You're not listed as a guarantor," she said. I blinked. "Meaning what?" "Meaning they used your name to secure it, but you're not legally bound if you withdraw before restructuring." "And if I do?" Danielle set down the papers, folded her hands, and said something I've never forgotten. "You don't need to confront them. Don't warn, don't scream. Just move the brick holding up their wall and let it fall." I went home that evening and opened the folder I had renamed. No longer Shadow Ledger, now Redemption Plan. Inside were PDFs, flagged emails, account screenshots, and a draft letter Danielle had helped me write weeks earlier, back when I still hesitated. I didn't hesitate anymore. They hadn't just pushed me out. They had used me until they assumed I had no more left to give. And maybe I didn't. But I had one thing left to take: my name. It took 4 minutes. That's how long the portal stayed open once I logged in using the administrative credentials I had created 2 years ago, back when I still had full access, back when I thought I was building something real. The screen flickered once, then showed a notice: co-applicant status active. Modification options available. I clicked remove. Then I uploaded the signed withdrawal letter Danielle and I had finalized 3 weeks earlier. I typed in my PIN, submitted. No alarms sounded, no confirmation emails. Just a quiet message in gray text at the bottom of the screen. Update received. Processing pending compliance review. It was done. The next step was risk control. I emailed the bank's loan manager, a man named Keith Horner, someone I'd negotiated with during the expansion phase. I attached a summary of financial discrepancies, vendor fraud, altered signatures, and access restrictions indicating internal exclusion. I was careful, clear, professional. What I didn't include was emotion. Within the hour, the bank froze the operating account tied to Lane Holdings and triggered an internal review of the loan. Quietly. No call to my father, no memo to Rhett, just a pause. A blinking cursor in their system where once there had been blind trust. While they scrambled, I moved. I contacted my personal accountant, Sabrina Kim, someone I trusted from my grad school years. We reviewed my exposure ran simulations on worst-case scenarios. She confirmed what Danielle had said. No liability, no credit damage, not even a legal obligation to notify them. The trust I had moved my savings into last month was protected. That night, for the first time in years, I left my phone on silent and actually meant it. I slept. When I woke up the next morning, there were already 32 missed calls. By mid-afternoon, there were 78 from my mother, 13 from my father, 7 from Rhett, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize until I played the voicemail. It was Gordon Maddox, their longtime company accountant. His voice was high-pitched, panicked, almost cracking. "Harper, call me now. This is serious. The loan's collapsing. The bank pulled support. We're at risk of default. You need to fix this. Do you hear me? You have to fix this." I listened to it twice. Not because I didn't understand what he meant, but because it sounded like justice. And justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't scream. It echoes. By early evening, Rhett sent his first text. "What the hell did you do?" And then another, "You're overreacting. We could have handled this internally." But the word "we" didn't land anymore. There hadn't been a "we" in a long time. Later that night, my mother left a voicemail, not angry, but quiet. Trembling. "Sweetheart, what's happening? Your father says the bank froze everything, that they might recall the loan. Did you sign something?" I did, but I didn't explain. I called her back, let the line ring twice. I removed my name, that's all. Her breath caught. "But you can't just do that." "Actually, I can," I said. And I did. She paused. "Harper, this affects all of us." "No," I replied calmly. "You made sure it didn't." And then I hung up, not in anger, in completion. They picked the restaurant we used to go to for birthdays, Leona's old brick walls, too many ceiling fans, and the private room near the fireplace where we'd once blown out candles and clinked glasses of ginger ale. But there were no balloons this time, no cake. Just my parents, Warren and Lynette, sitting stiff at one end of the table and Rhett staring at his phone pretending this was beneath him. There was also an empty chair waiting for me, as if they still believed I could be summoned. I arrived 15 minutes late. On purpose. I wore gray slacks and a button-down blouse, neutral, unreadable. Danielle had once told me power doesn't shout. It arrives without apology. Rhett stood when I entered. "Thanks for coming." "I didn't come for you," I said, taking the chair slowly. "Let's not waste each other's time." Warren leaned forward, eyes fixed on mine. "You made your point, loud and clear." "No," I said, voice calm. "The bank made my point. I just stopped protecting your lie." His jaw tightened. Lynette shifted uncomfortably. "We're trying to hold this together," he said. "You think you're punishing us, Harper, but you're punishing the legacy your grandfather built." I looked at him steady. "Grandpa built a garage. You turned it into a dictatorship." Rhett scoffed. "Oh, come on. We gave you everything." "You gave me a job," I said, meeting his gaze. Not a voice. The silence that followed was dense, almost warm, like a room that had finally stopped pretending to be anything else. Then Lynette, my mother, spoke almost in a whisper. "What do you want, Harper?" That was the question, wasn't it? Not revenge. I had already taken that. What I wanted now was clarity. I reached into my bag and placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This is a signed affidavit confirming I've permanently withdrawn from the company loan, the board, and all business operations. You will never use my name again." Warren opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." I took a breath. "I'm also submitting an anonymous tip to the state auditor. There are funds missing, vendors unpaid, payroll inconsistencies." I slid the envelope forward. "It's your mess now, fully, legally." Rhett's face turned red. "You're destroying us over ego." "I'm not destroying anything," I said, standing. "I'm just removing the illusion that I was ever part of it." I turned toward the door. Behind me, for the first time in my life, my father said the one word I never expected to hear. "Harper, please." I paused, not from hesitation, but from satisfaction. "You left a voicemail telling me we were done," I said, without turning around. "I'm just agreeing with you." Formally. And then I left. The story made it into the papers. Not the big ones. Just a quiet piece in a local business digest. Lane Auto Care faces financial turmoil amid internal disputes. I didn't leak it, but I knew who did. Danielle called me 2 days later, her voice half serious, half smiling. When people lose power, she said they look for someone to blame. They just didn't expect that person to have already walked away. After that, the voicemails turned sharp. From my father. You ungrateful child. We built that business for you. You're ruining your future. From Rhett. You think you're clever, but you'll need us someday. From Gordon Maddox, the accountant. Do you even understand what this means? You've destroyed their legacy. But here's the thing. No one said out loud. They destroyed it long before I pulled out. They destroyed it when they used my name, but denied me a seat at the table, when they decided I was a threat, not a daughter, when they made me invisible. Now the loan was caving in. The accounts frozen, the vendor contracts unraveling, and me, I was untouched. No legal blowback, no financial damage, my credit intact, my savings secure. I forwarded the last voicemail to Danielle, then deleted the rest. I took my phone off silent, and for the first time in years, it stayed quiet. No crisis, no requests, no fires that only I could put out. I moved into a small loft in downtown Portland. Nothing fancy, just sunlight, clean windows, and space enough for both a desk and peace. I started consulting quietly, helping small women-led startups avoid the kind of traps I'd lived through, not because I needed purpose, but because I already had it. 3 months later, an envelope arrived at my new address. No return name, just the bank's logo and a tracking barcode. Inside was a single sheet of paper. This letter confirms that the commercial loan associated with Harper Lane has been formally withdrawn and restructured. No further obligation remains, no action required, no thank you, no apology, no spin. Just a line drawn in ink in law and finally in truth. I placed the letter in a folder marked complete and slid it into the back of the cabinet. That night, I lit a candle by the window. The loft was quiet. The city below hummed unaware and alive. I thought of that voicemail one last time. Don't bother coming to the reunion. We're cutting ties. They wanted silence, obedience, absence, and they got all three. What they didn't expect was that I would thrive inside that silence, that I would build something not out of revenge, but out of reality. I poured a glass of wine, opened a new client file, and wrote one line at the top, "You're not difficult, you're just finally visible." And then I kept going. They called it a celebration. White tablecloths, golden uplights, the quiet clink of champagne glasses against the backdrop of a string quartet. 100 people gathered inside the Hawthorne Hotel's private ballroom that night to honor my father, Charles Blair, Executive Vice President of First Harbor Bank, for his 40 years of service and impeccable legacy. He looked the part. Silver hair, combed back navy suit, tailored to perfection, voice crisp and effortless as he stood at the head table raising his glass. To legacy, he said, to vision carried forward by those who understand it. The room hushed, attentive. I remember watching his eyes scan the crowd warm and easy as he nodded at board members, smiled at old colleagues. Then, just as I let myself believe I might not be invisible tonight, his gaze landed on me. His tone didn't change. My real children, he continued, are the ones who've made me proud. There was a pause, barely a breath, and then applause. Hands met hands around the room. Smiles, toasts, laughter. I didn't clap. I couldn't. Charles Blair was my father. Evelyn Blair was his youngest daughter. And in that moment, I knew I was neither legacy nor pride. I was something else entirely. Then across the room, he lifted his glass slightly again and said clearly enough for the laughter to quiet, "You can leave." Just that. 3 words. Enough to strip the air out of the room. I stood, slowly. My chair scraped the polished floor sharp against the silence. I didn't cry, not yet. I just stood, and then beside me Daniel stood too. He didn't say anything. Not yet, but what he did next changed everything. When I was 8, my brother Greg won the state science fair. My father bought him a telescope so large it required its own tripod. The base was engraved. Gregory Blair, future engineer, it read. When I was 10, my sister Claire was selected for a junior medical summer program at Yale. She received a stethoscope, real not a toy, wrapped in tissue paper inside a velvet-lined box. When I was 12, I performed Debussy's Clair de Lune in our living room for my birthday recital. I practiced for weeks, memorizing every note, every pause. That afternoon, our neighbors and my father's colleagues gathered wine in hand-soft murmurs of polite expectation rising in the air. Halfway through, I missed one note. Just one. My hands kept playing, but I heard it. And so did he. Charles Blair stood up, quietly, adjusted his tie, and walked out the front door. The music kept going, but the room fell still. My mother Helen gave me a small nod from across the piano, one of those silent nods that says, keep going. So I did. I finished the piece through a blur of tears, not knowing if anyone even clapped. That night, my gift was a book. No note, no inscription. Just a hard cover of Great Expectations placed quietly on my pillow. I knew what it meant. From the outside, we were the kind of family that belonged on magazine covers, colonial house with navy shutters, Sunday brunches, alumni decals on every bumper. Inside, we were something else. Greg became the future of finance, Claire Boston's prodigy in a lab coat, and me, I was the quiet one, the artistic one, the one who always read too much and spoke too little. If they were performance, I was background music. My mother tried in her way. She would find me sketching or writing poems and say, "You have something beautiful in you, Evelyn." But beauty didn't buy legacies. In our house, the currency of love was excellence, measurable, polished, applause-worthy, and I had always come up short. When my mother died, no one in the house cried out loud. She passed in the spring of my sophomore year of college, pancreatic cancer, quiet, cruel. My siblings flew in for the service, wore the right colors, hugged the right people. Then they left. I stayed. The house felt different without her. Not emptier, just colder. The kind of cold that sinks into your skin when the heat is technically on, but no one remembers to adjust the thermostat. Charles. My father stopped using the living room entirely. Her chair stayed by the window untouched like a sealed exhibit, but no one looked at it, not even him. We never spoke of her again. Not when I brought it up. Not when I asked about how they met. Not even when I found the old wedding album buried in a closet. One evening over dinner, I told him I'd decided to study literature. I'd been accepted into the program at Vassar. He didn't look up from his plate. Then, you'll need to find a way to pay for it. That was it. No fight, no yelling, just a wall coming down brick by quiet brick. Greg had his Wharton tuition fully covered. Claire's med school bills were written off as investment. But for me, there would be no legacy to inherit, no help, no questions asked. So I took out loans. Waited tables, sold first editions online when I had to. I studied Emily Dickinson by day and scrubbed bar glasses by night. At 19, I learned how to grieve two absences at once, the mother who left and the father who stayed but vanished anyway. We met in a used bookstore on a Wednesday afternoon. It was raining not dramatically, just steady enough to keep most people indoors. I was looking for a copy of The Age of Innocence with the original deckled edges. My hand reached for it at the same time as his. We both froze. Then both pulled back. And then, for reasons I still can't explain, I said, "You take it." He smiled, not letting go of the book. "I already own it," he said, "but this one has your name in it." He was right. Inside the front cover, someone had scrawled in faded ink to Evelyn. "You'll understand this story someday. It wasn't from my family. The handwriting didn't match anyone I knew, but something about it felt familiar." We ended up talking for an hour in the philosophy aisle. His name was Daniel Harper. He was a software engineer by trade, but had a minor in comparative literature. He had dimples he didn't seem to know about, and eyes that didn't look through people they rested. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me I was too sensitive or hard to read. He just listened. And when I told him in a too fast rush that my family didn't really talk to me, that I wasn't exactly chosen, he didn't flinch. He said, "Some people don't choose their people. They build them." It wasn't love at first sight. It was quieter than that. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel like I had to disappear. Daniel proposed with a first edition copy of Middlemarch. The ring was tucked into the hollowed-out center of the book between chapters 21 and 22. He didn't kneel. He didn't recite a speech. He just opened the page, looked at me, and said, "We don't have to do this the way they do it. We can build something else." And we did. We lived in a small apartment above a florist in Somerville, one-bedroom crooked floors, windows that let in more sound than light. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old paint. I loved it. That's where Salt Light Press was born. It started with 2 manuscripts, a memoir by a retired nurse who had worked the AIDS ward in the 80s, and a poetry collection from a woman who'd aged out of foster care. We printed each one in runs of 300, hand-bound them in craft covers, and drove them to local bookstores ourselves. We weren't rich, but the work felt honest, quiet, like we were returning voices to people who'd been written off. When we got married, it was in the reading room of the Cambridge Public Library. No aisle, no bouquet, just sunlight spines of old books and 20 people we trusted. Claire came my sister, but only for the ceremony. She wore a blazer that didn't wrinkle when she crossed her arms and left before cake. Later that night, she sent me a message. "Cute wedding. Hope it works out." My father didn't come. He never responded to the invitation. But Daniel held my hand the entire night. And when we danced quietly in a hallway near the reference desk, he whispered, "You're not background anymore. You're the whole melody." I didn't know how to believe that yet, but I wanted to. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, but I recognized the seal, First Harper Bank. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, a misrouted letter, maybe something for Greg. But when I opened it there, it was my name printed clearly at the top of the invitation. "Please join us in honoring Charles Blair on the occasion of his retirement. Formal dinner, business attire, RSVP required." There was no note, no signature, just the printed words and a date. Daniel looked at it from across the kitchen counter. "He didn't send this," he said. I know I replied. But he approved it. We stared at the card like it might speak. It had been over 3 years since I'd last heard from my father. Not a call when Salt Light got featured in the Atlantic. Not a message when my first collection won a local book award. Not even a forwarded email from Claire or Greg. Just this. And yet against all reason, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. What if he was trying in his own way? What if this dinner was a door, not wide open but cracked just enough? Daniel watched me closely. "You don't have to go," he said. But I was already turning the card over in my hand, searching for something it couldn't give me. Maybe this time. Maybe I wouldn't be invisible. The Hawthorne Hotel looked exactly how I remembered it, polished, historical, too proud to show its age. We arrived early. Daniel wore the navy suit I loved, the one he only brought out for weddings, and moments he knew I might need armor. I wore a dark green dress and my mother's pendant, a small circle of amber set in silver. No one had seen it since her funeral. Inside the ballroom, a string quartet played Vivaldi. Staff in white gloves moved like clockwork, adjusting chairs, refilling glasses, making everything seamless. We checked in at the reception table. The woman behind the name tags paused. "Evelyn Blair." She asked, double-checking the list. "Blair Harper," I corrected gently. She handed me a card with Table 9 printed in gold foil. We followed the numbers. Table 9 was near the side wall behind a pillar partially obscured from the stage. The other seats were filled with second cousins, someone who might have been my father's assistant, and a man who asked if we were part of the catering team. Claire waved at us from across the room. She sat near the center beside Greg and his wife in view of the microphone. She didn't get up, just raised her glass a little, a gesture that said, "You made it this far. Don't ruin it." Dinner was served. Conversation spun around the tables. Stock portfolios, prep schools, second homes. No one asked about books. I excused myself once to the restroom just to breathe. In the mirror, I noticed my lipstick had faded. My hands were trembling. Back at the table, Aunt Judith appeared beside me. She wore pale lavender and too much perfume, the kind that clings to silk for days. She leaned in, her voice low. "Try to make him proud tonight, dear. Don't embarrass him." She patted my hand, like a warning dressed up as affection. When the room dimmed for the speech, my heart moved somewhere into my throat. Charles Blair rose from the head table like he'd done it 100 times before, smooth assured, the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention because it had always been given. He thanked the board, the firm, the clients. He even thanked Helen, my mother, calling her the quiet compass behind his years of clarity. I felt the tears before I knew they were there. Then came the part I hadn't let myself expect, but still hoped for. My children, he began. They've carried my values further than I ever dreamed. A pause. Greg, he said, turning to my brother, is a mind sharper than any market. Claire, what a miracle in motion. A healer, a builder. I waited, sat straighter, smoothed the skirt of my dress. Maybe he'd say something about Saltlight, about stories, about how value isn't always in numbers. But he looked over me like I was furniture. And then he smiled, raised his glass, and said it. My real children are the ones who've made me proud. The applause came fast, too fast. Like no one knew what to do with the silence between those words. Daniel didn't clap. Neither did I. My father looked directly at me. No malice, no anger. Just that same clean clinical clarity he used for interest rates and bottom lines. Then he said, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "You can leave." 3 words. Not shouted, not whispered, just final. And for the first time in a very long time, I stood. The silence was the kind that made silverware stop moving. I stood unsure if I'd actually leave or just dissolve into the carpet. My fingers went cold, my ears rang. The room around me blurred faces I didn't know, faces I'd grown up with. Some looked away, some didn't look at all. And then Daniel stood too. He didn't look at me first. He looked at my father. Then he reached for his water glass. Not champagne, not anything sparkling, and tapped it gently with his fork. Once, twice. The sound echoed crisp against linen and tension. May I, he asked the room. No one answered, but no one stopped him. He turned slightly, his voice calm. I'd like to offer a toast. Not to Charles, though I know this evening was meant to celebrate him. I want to toast Evelyn. My breath caught. Daniel continued, measured but certain. This is a woman who read poetry to her mother every night in hospice care, even when her own heart was breaking. Who sold her personal books just to stay in school because her father said fairy tales weren't worth financing. Who gave her brother money from her college savings when he nearly lost his job over a debt and never once asked for it back. A few people shifted. Greg didn't look up. She built a publishing house from nothing, one that gave a voice to people no one else would print. Foster kids, grieving nurses, forgotten veterans. If that's not legacy, I don't know what is. His voice didn't rise. He wasn't performing. He was telling the truth aloud for the first time in front of people who had never cared to listen. You may not see her, but I do. He turned to me, then eyes steady. You're not invisible. You never were. No one clapped, but no one stopped us either when he took my hand. We walked out of that ballroom with no applause, no fanfare, just the steady weight of our own dignity returned. The cold air outside bit at my skin, but I didn't feel small anymore. I felt tired, released. Daniel didn't say anything until we reached the car. Then softly, like he didn't need me to believe it, just to hear it, he said, "That room isn't where your worth ever lived." And for once, I believed him. I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. Daniel offered Silence Tea a warm palm on my back when I couldn't catch my breath. He never asked me to explain. That, in itself, felt like a kind of grace. The morning of the 4th day, there was a knock. It was Judith, my father's older sister. She stood on the porch, holding a small leather photo album and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "I thought you might want these," she said. "And I brought scones. They're too dry, but they make decent company." We sat at the kitchen table, the album unopened between us. She sipped tea, then looked at me without blinking. "He wasn't always like that, you know. Your father." I said nothing. Judith sighed, then reached over and opened the album. Inside were photos I'd never seen. My mother holding me as a newborn. My father, younger, smiling, actually smiling as he tossed toddler me into the air at a lake I couldn't name. "He changed," she said quietly. "After Helen got sick." after he lost the version of life he thought he could control. I traced a photo of the three of us side by side on a blanket. My mother looked tired. My father's hand rested gently on her shoulder. He couldn't fix it, Judith whispered. So he decided to master what was left. I didn't forgive him in that moment, but something in me unclenched, not because he deserved it, because I did. The voicemail came on a Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry in the quiet when the notification buzzed. Unknown number, but the voice was unmistakable. Evelyn, it's Greg. I guess I owe you something more than silence. I sat down on the edge of the bed, heart steady but unsure. I didn't know what he was going to say that night. I should have said something. During, after. I didn't. A pause. I could hear traffic in the background, a horn, a turn signal clicking. I watched you walk out and all I could think about was that time you covered my tuition bill at Wharton, and how I never thanked you. Not properly. The message ended with, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure. Just here. No apology." Not really. But it wasn't nothing. Later that week, a package arrived. Inside was the telescope, his old one. The plaque still read Gregory Blair, future engineer. But someone had scratched a new line beneath it, not perfectly, but clear for Evelyn. The only one who ever looked up. I didn't cry, but I sat with it for a long time. Maybe not all legacies are passed down. Maybe some are handed back quietly, one piece at a time. I started therapy 3 months after the dinner. Not because of what he said, "You can leave," but because of what I felt after. Emptiness. Not rage. Not grief. Just the hollow hush of finally having no one left to prove anything to. The office was small, pale walls, one tall ficus in the corner, and a chair that squeaked if you shifted too much. My therapist's name was Mara. She wore clogs and cardigans and never once used the phrase inner child. At first, I told her about Daniel, about the business, about how much tea I drank, how many hours I worked. It took 4 sessions before I said the word father. When I did, she didn't lean in, didn't blink. She just let the words sit there between us like a photo I'd placed on a table. He always made it clear I wasn't what he ordered, I told her. But I spent years still trying to serve it warm. She wrote nothing down, just nodded once, then said, "And what are you serving now?" The question stunned me. For a long time, I'd lived as someone who waited to be invited, validated, claimed. And now I was learning to sit in rooms without shrinking, to publish stories without needing anyone's last name attached, to say this happened without whispering. There was a day, months later, when Mara offered me the bigger chair. Just for comfort, she said, but I knew what it meant, and I took it. We found out on a Wednesday. I'd felt dizzy folding laundry, and Daniel, half joking, half worried, had stopped by the drugstore on his way home. When the test turned positive, we sat in silence. Not shock, not panic, just awe. He touched my hand lightly. "Whatever happens," he said, "you don't owe anyone a performance." That night I opened a blank notebook. No expectations, no outlines. Just the quiet thrill of starting again. We started talking about space. Not metaphorical space, actual space. Walls, floors, cracked windows that wouldn't be enough for winter with a newborn. Portland came up. Daniel had family there. Soft rain, slower streets, a bookstore that already carried Salt-Light titles. We didn't tell many people. Not yet. I did call Aunt Judith, told her the news. She cried more than I expected. Said my mother would have loved to hold a grandchild. I believed her. Claire sent a text. "Congrats. Hope it's not too late for a do-over." I didn't reply. The lease in Somerville ended quietly. We packed over 2 weeks' books press equipment, teacups, the telescope. I wrapped my mother's pendant in flannel and tucked it in a drawer close to the baby things. One night before we left, Daniel placed his hand on my stomach and whispered, "You're already more seen than I ever was." I knew he wasn't talking to me, but I heard it too. I didn't know he was in the hospital until Claire called. Just a voicemail, "Dad's had a mild stroke. He's stable. Thought you should know." I drove down alone. Daniel stayed with the baby. I told him I wouldn't be long. The hospital was newer than I expected, sterile and quiet with beige curtains and the scent of something too clean to feel safe. He looked smaller in the bed, not fragile, just reduced. I stood by the door for a full minute before stepping in. He was awake, eyes open, alert. He looked at me like I was a neighbor he almost recognized, not surprised, not emotional. We didn't hug. There were no machines beeping dramatically, just the soft rhythm of monitored breathing. I pulled the only chair in the room closer, sat down. We didn't speak for 12 minutes. I counted. At one point, he shifted, looked at me, then at the pendant around my neck. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited, but not for an apology, just to see if he'd take the chair across from me. He didn't. Our daughter was born on a cold October morning. We named her Alice after no one in particular, though the name felt like something soft and brave at once. She came into the world wailing and furious. I held her close, whispered nonsense, cried for reasons I'll never entirely be able to name. Daniel placed the telescope by the nursery window, said one day they'd look through it together. In the weeks that followed, the house stayed dim and slow. Bottles, blankets, lullabies hummed out of key. But something inside me steadied. No one was coming to evaluate me. No father, no legacy committee. Just this child looking up, waiting to be met. At 3 weeks old, she stared at me for the first time, really stared. Eyes wide and new, unfiltered. And I realized this was the first time anyone had ever looked at me like that without expectation. No measuring, no grading, just presence. I didn't promise her I'd be perfect. I didn't write out mantras in a baby book. I just stayed. When she cried, I stayed. When she slept, I stayed. Some nights I sat beside her crib, the moon stretching through the window, and whispered, "I see you." That's enough. Not because someone once told me that, but because no one ever did. And I wasn't going to wait for permission to become the person I needed back then. If no one ever left the door open for you, you learn how to build your own.